I never thought a perfect Thanksgiving weekend would end with me walking alone in the dark, the trail headlamp cutting a white line through cold air, wondering how quickly ordinary plans could become something I could never explain away. That sentence, how quickly normal can break, has stuck with me for years. It began with small domestic details: a packed car, the smell of gravy still on my jacket, friends laughing about football scores. It ended in 3 nights that made me leave the woods behind. If you like true-life horror and first-person stories, stick around until the end and consider subscribing and liking. There are more stories like this, and if one of them keeps you awake, you'll know why people don't treat night hikes as harmless anymore. This happened about 10 years ago. I was 26, newly out of the city and living in a rented cabin on the edge of a state park, the kind with a single-lane road and a mailbox that always leaned. It was Thanksgiving weekend. My sister had driven down with a casserole and we'd eaten late. When the kitchen clock hit 11, she wanted smoke. I wanted the dark. We argued a little, like siblings do. Then I laced up my boots and told her I'd be back before midnight. The trail was a 2-mile loop, nothing technical, more of a path people used for morning runs and dog walks. At night, it transformed into a thin, uncertain vein through the pines. The air was sharp with wood smoke and leaf rot, and the moon was a sliver behind clouds that let the world live half-lit. I had a headlamp, a small pack with a flask and a sandwich, and the kind of confidence that comes from too little caution. The first odd thing was the sound. Not animals, my area had the usual raccoons and the far-off hoot of an owl, but a cadence like footsteps that were too slow for the trail. They matched my pace in a way that made the hair on my arms prickle. I told myself, out loud, probably a jogger, and picked up my step. That worked for about 3 minutes, until a voice called from a patch of shadow ahead. "Beautiful night, huh?" It sounded casual, like someone trying to make conversation on a bus. I saw a figure 100 feet away, leaning against a birch near the path. He was taller than me, wearing a dark coat, hands shoved in pockets. I should have altered course. I didn't. I smiled and said something about the stars. He walked with me for a while. No one ahead, no one behind. We kept the same measured pace. He was polite in a way that made me always look for the second gesture. He asked where I came from, if I'd been drinking. I told a little white lie about the flask. He laughed and said he hadn't had liquor in years. Then he mentioned my jacket. He said, quiet, "Nice jacket. Smells like you just had dinner." He reached and tapped my shoulder with the back of his knuckles. That touch was ordinary and invasive at once. The path narrowed. There was a shallow ditch to one side and a drop to the other. He kept talking about the park, the weather, the people who lived in my cabin lane. He knew the name of the lane. I told my brain to calculate exit strategies while my mouth made small talk. I tried to speed up. He matched me. My breath came shallow and fast, fogging in the lamplight. I remember the way his shadow fell across my boots, long and patient. My hand tightened around the strap of my pack. I had a flashlight in my pocket and thought, absurdly, of the pepper spray I kept in the glove compartment of my car. On a straightaway, he stopped. He turned, face flat in the lamplight. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. He moved fast, not a lunge, too controlled for that, but a sweep of motion that closed distance. He grabbed my arm with fingers that were cold enough to sting through fabric. I heard something wet and soft behind us, a thud like a stick hitting the earth. When I pulled away, he tightened his grip, then let it go like a man adjusting a watch. He didn't say why he'd stopped me. He just stared, waiting to see how I would line up my next move. I made a decision that felt reckless in the moment. I dropped my pack and spun, headlamp swinging, pointed toward the scrape of road where headlights might be. I ran with a clumsy gait, the world contracting to the dull thump of my boots and my own breath. I looked back once and saw him on the path, standing where I'd left him, hands in his coat pockets. He didn't follow me. He didn't shout. He just watched. His mouth was a thin line. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking and my knees were jelly. The engine turned over like an accusation. I drove home slow, glancing at every shadow along the lane. My sister's bunk was upstairs. She was asleep with the TV on. I tried to explain what had happened and got a look that was a mix of, "You're safe now," and "Don't be stupid." I slept in my car that night. The police took my report the next morning after I called. They asked the right questions in the right order. Did he touch you? Did he follow you? Can you identify him? My answers were honest but small. I had no description that would hold up in a lineup. I told them the jacket, the height, the voice. They told me prints from a simple grab often yielded nothing. Modern phones and plate readers were the things that solved things, they said, when they solved things. Weeks later, there was a break in a case in the neighboring county. A man had been arrested for burglaries along the highway, taking advantage of people who hiked at night, people who were out after parties. The description matched in broad strokes. The police never told me more than that. The arrest was pinned to a different county's evidence and an unrelated crime. I never knew if it was him in my lane, or if I had been one of many who'd brushed against the same shadow. I moved out of that cabin the following spring. I still walk trails during the day. I will not walk them alone after nightfall. The image I carry is simple and domestic. The smell of gravy on my jacket, the way a stranger can turn ordinary textures into a trap. That Thanksgiving weekend, a joke about smoke and a desire for cold air turned into a night I spent counting headlights until dawn. It taught me a small, hard lesson about how patient danger can be. A year after that, I drove back for the holiday to see family and felt the old itch to stretch my legs. The second story happened then. I was 27. I lived in a cramped apartment above a bakery, and my brother had come down with friends to celebrate. We ate late, pie cooled on the sill, the house filled with candlelight. Around midnight, a couple of us decided to hike a ridge nearby that overlooked a valley. The path was steep, the kind of place people went to smoke or talk in private. None of us expected anything but cold air and a good view. We started with jokes, silly barbs, the easy cruelty of brothers. There were 5 of us. Halfway up, my brother lagged. He kept saying his ankle felt off. It swelled like a bruise under the sock. We stopped to rest. The valley smelled like cedar and wet earth, and below us, the town's lights were a murmuring constellation. There was a house across the ridge, old and set back from the road, with a porch light that burned low even at that hour. Someone, maybe Jordan, said, "That place looks abandoned." We joked about squatters. Then we saw movement on the porch, the sudden straightening of a figure, the way somebody brightened the porch light and stood very still. At first, it seemed like someone watching the night, then like someone waiting. "Probably a night watcher," someone muttered. We started again. The conversation clipped. The path tightened and angled under the roots of trees slick with recent rain. My brother's steps were uneven. His phone had no service. He asked me to lead for a while. I walked in front of him like a sentinel, the beam of my headlamp catching on low branches. The thing I remember most clearly is the glass. Somewhere down the slope, a bottle hit rock and fractured. The sound was sharp and white in the wet night. In the pause that followed, we all heard a voice, thin, deliberate, calling out a name. It was not a shout. It was a slow, patient calling, like someone rehearsing a lullaby. The name, it said, was my brother's. It sounded like it came from behind the porch of the house. I stopped walking. My brother's hand on my shoulder was light and hot. "We should go back," he said. He sounded like someone trying to persuade a child. We did not go back. We looped closer to the porch to see if the porch light came from a person or a motion sensor. The house had 3 windows that faced us. One was dark, one glowed with the weak orange of an ember, and the third had something arranged near it that could have been a table or a person sitting very still. We laughed, and it came out thinly. Someone joked about the house being staged for a film. Someone else whispered that the person could be dangerous. Then the porch light flicked out.
A quiet, like the inside of a closed book, settled. We felt watched in the way people do when someone watches them through the dark, not from across a street, but from inside their mouths. That was when the barking started, sharp, a single dog barking as if surprised, and then a second sound like a drink being poured in wrong, slow and spreading. Someone swore. My brother let out a small cry and then went very quiet. I turned and saw him bent at the waist, hand cupped over his ankle. He had a bruise that was pink and angry, like a hidden wound opening. He swore again and said, "Help me up." One of our group, Tom, crouched and offered a hand. A figure stepped from the shadow of the house, not down on the porch, but through the side, where an overgrown path made a faint line, a place people cut through to avoid the road. He moved with the steady gait of someone who'd done this many times. He wore a jacket like somebody who would be comfortable near a fire. His hands were empty, but his face had something I couldn't name. Either too much patience or the right amount of patience for something terrible. "Hey," he said, and it wasn't friendly but practiced, like a man addressing people he'd been watching for the better part of the night. "You boys lost?" We said no. We said we were fine. My brother gritted his teeth and tried to stand. The stranger smiled, that thin smile that never reaches the eyes. He asked for a cigarette. Someone in our group had one and passed it. The stranger took it, and then, without being invited, moved closer to my brother. He crouched and offered his shoulder, making a show of looking at the ankle. He said, "Looks bad. You should get that checked." Then he said the thing that made my blood freeze. "You should come over. I can help. I got some whiskey, some food, warm you up." He gestured vaguely toward the house. He said it like an offer, the way a neighbor offers sugar. Tom muttered something about leaving. The stranger nodded as if we'd just decided to go, and then put an arm lightly across my brother's back, supporting him. "Let's get you inside," he said. He guided my brother toward the side path, gentle as a shepherd. My brother leaned against him, and for a suspended moment, I felt my presence dissolve. There were 5 of us, and then 4, and then only 2. We traded looks. I wanted to say no. I wanted to shove the stranger and take my brother by force. But my brother moved. He took 3 steps, then leaned into the stranger, trusting. The stranger led them down the cut-through path and into shadow. For a second, I thought it would be fine. For a second, I thought the worst part of the night had been the bruise. We stayed. One of the group, Jules, argued we should follow. Another said we should call it in. I searched my pockets for service and found nothing.
We stayed because we were young, and because a person who is led away by a stranger with a limp is still, in the moment, a person being helped. That reasoning is easy to make in the mouth until it becomes a rule we regret. Minutes passed. Then there were sounds, low and muffled, like a softened argument, like someone being persuaded back into a house. Then silence. We waited, stupidly hopeful. When 10 minutes became 20, Tom and I took a light and went to the side path. It was overgrown with thorn and leaf. The porch light was off. The cut-through was muddy. We called my brother's name. Nothing answered. We found the cigarette butt still glowing faintly in the frost, crushed into the mud like an afterthought. We called the police. They came with lights that made the sky bleed white. They asked the same measured questions that had gotten wrote over my earlier report. Did you see anyone else? Did you see them go in? Were there tracks? The yard had footprints too small to be the stranger's, and then none. The detective looked at the house and then at us and asked if we were sure about the 4th person. We described him as best we could. Height, voice, the ease with which he moved. He said he'd have officers canvass the area, talk to neighbors, check cameras on the main road. They found marks on the back porch, scuffs like someone had dragged something heavy, and a smear of mud on a lower stair. They found a set of footprints that did not belong to any of us. They did not find my brother. I spent the night in a chair at the station, the fluorescent light making everything too small. When daylight came, teams fanned out.
My brother turned up 3 days later, disoriented, at a convenience store on the next highway over, 20 miles away. He was dirty and barefoot, his ankle bandaged awkwardly with stones in his shoe where the sole had been torn away. He couldn't remember the path from the house to the highway. He remembered a woman's voice, a stove, a basin of water. He remembered a door locked behind him. He remembered an old man humming. Those memories were patchwork at best and lost their edges when he tried to describe faces. Police arrested a man later that week. A neighbor reported seeing someone hauling a cooler to the road in the early morning hours, and a camera caught a truck with a peculiar bumper sticker. The man they detained had been known to the neighborhood for odd hours and odd invitations. He admitted to hosting people for drinks sometimes and to locking his door when he got nervous. There was a lot of "we think" and "we suspect" in the reports. My brother was physically unharmed beyond a bruise and an ankle that would bother him for weeks, but the shape of the thing that happened, being led into a house because someone offered help, stayed with him in the long term. A glance in a grocery aisle that lasted too long, a refusal of rides. We stopped going on night hikes that year.
We changed our habits, and we argued sometimes about whether we did the right thing by not following him into the dark. The lesson was knotted between gratitude and luck. We had been close enough to lose someone we loved to a casual offer of help. The Thanksgiving pies in the window felt obscene for a while, like a table set in a house whose porch light was an invitation to strangers. The third story was quieter until it wasn't. This happened later that same winter, when I was 28. My friend Mark invited me to join a group for a short night trek up a ridge that locals called Widow's Walk because of a one-time tragedy decades ago. We went every year. There was a ritual. Someone brought cider, someone brought a candle, someone told a ghost story, and then we hiked back under the now dim moon, careful not to drop embers into the dry underbrush. That night there were 6 of us. The group had the casual familiarity of a collection of friends and acquaintances who liked being out after dark. The walk was supposed to be harmless. The forest smelled of sap and cold river water. We paused at the top for the view, candles lit, breath visible. We spoke little. The group consisted of people who knew how to behave in the dark, courteous, brisk, slightly wary. On the descent, the path narrowed. Mark hiked in front of me, always the one to set pace. I remember him slowing and then stopping at a switchback, leaning over to tie a lace. When he pushed up and started again, I saw it. A ribbon of light from a phone far below, moving with purpose. Not a glow of someone taking a picture, but a beam swinging fast, like a searchlight. The light cut the trees and then vanished. Then it came again, closer now, and we heard voices down the slope, raised, impatient voices. We thought, briefly, of hunters. We had no business in the middle of hunting season. The ridge was a no-hunt zone, but people ignored rules. We moved faster. The light kept pace below us, then flicked off. A dog barked, long and far, not the home dog kind, but the thin note of something without direction. We reached a small clearing and found a circle of broken glass. Bottles smashed into the dirt, the old ritual of someone's careless celebration. The candles at our feet made the glass sparkle like stars. That sparkle is the last serene thing I remember before everything compressed. From the brush came a figure lit by the beam from below, and behind him another. They were young, maybe my age, faces bright with something like adrenaline. They wore jackets and the sort of boots that meant they'd been walking for hours. One of them smiled in a way that made me feel watched, as though I were the choice of a crowd. They asked if we could share our fire. We said no, politely. They kept moving and hovered like moths around our circle. Then one of them reached and grabbed Mark's pack without asking, and I heard the hitch of breath from the others, shock at the theft. I stood up. "Hey," I said. The boy who'd taken the pack looked at me with the easy insolence of someone who expected no resistance. He had smeared dirt on his knuckles like war paint. The other walked closer and started humming a tune without words. We told them to leave. They laughed and let Mark's pack dangle like a threat.
The youngest, who had a loose tooth, produced a flick knife and clicked it open. The sound of that small blade sliding out was obscene in the cold. My hand went to my pocket for pepper spray, and I was suddenly aware of how small and private weapons feel against public danger. The group tightened around the pack. One of our friends, Leah, started to speak loudly, telling them we would call the police. They answered with a joke about never being caught. The young man with the knife moved as though to make a point about distance. Then he lunged, not at me, not at Mark, but at the pack, and the strap caught Leah's wrist as she tried to block him. She screamed. It was small and immediate and cut the night. Everything became crunch and motion. Mark shoved the knife-wielding boy away, and the other boy, a larger one, grabbed at Mark's shoulder. I saw the knife flash at someone's ribs in a motion that was panicked and clumsy. The bright beam of the phone below swept up like a searchlight, as if fate demanded a spotlight. The sound of the blade met flesh was not gory, but it was definitive. A thump. A sound like someone falling into leaves. The larger boy screamed, and the smaller one fled, disappearing into the trees with the phone beam chasing him. We were all there, in the hollowed silence after. A cigarette butt smoldering, a candle guttering, the smell of citrus from Mark's hand sanitizer mixing with gunmetal and something like copper in the air. Leah was the one who took the worst of it. She collapsed to the ground and clutched her side where warmth was spreading through her jacket. She smelled faintly of cider and spice. We were useless at first, hands fumbling for makeshift bandages, the world suddenly too small to hold the actions we'd tolerated just a minute before. Someone called 911 with fingers that were shaking so hard the number keys blurred. The kid with the knife was gone, swallowed by the wood. They took Leah to the hospital, where the wound was stitchable and not fatal. They said later that a larger artery had been missed by an inch. That detail, an inch, has stayed with me as proof that luck sits at the edge of violence and decides who gets to keep breathing. The police found footprints and a drop of blood that led away, and then nothing. They canvassed roads and asked if anyone had seen teenagers with muddy boots. Neighbors said they had a bonfire and 2 kids left. No one remembered faces clearly enough to make charges stick. Mark took to sleeping with the lights on for months. Leah returned, quiet, to the group, but not whole. She didn't join night hikes anymore. I stopped thinking of the woods as a place of ritual and started seeing it as the kind of place where strangers could turn ritual into chaos, where a night meant unlit personalities could press against you with tools and sudden decisions. After the 3 nights, I started to notice a pattern, a domestic smell followed by an uninvited hand, a porch light that promised warmth and instead offered a threshold to someone else's plan, a bottle smashing, and a laughter that was practiced for cruelty. I watched my friends change cadence in conversation, closed ranks in places where we used to spread out. Thanksgiving tables felt different. Candles were now fragile beacons rather than warm conversation. The holidays, which once meant ease, now had edges. I won't tell you that the woods are haunted, or that every light in the night means threat. Maybe some of these things were luck and poor choices, and the grace of being in the right place at the right time. But the shape they left in me isn't tidy. After the 3 nights, my sleep had a seam down the center where peace used to be. I dreamed of porch lights that never turned on, and men who knew the names of my childhood streets. I woke with my hands on my head, thinking of all the small movements that could have made the difference. The choice to say no to a stranger's help, the decision to go back to the car, the moment we laughed off a bottle smashing into the cold and chose not to leave. If there is a takeaway, it's simple and practical, because moralizing rarely helps a person in a moment of danger. Keep company. Carry means to defend yourself. Trust your pulse when it tells you something is off. And don't glamorize the idea of brave night walks as if courage alone can protect you. These things changed how I look at dark paths. They changed how I pass by porches at night. They changed how I set a place at a table, leaving room for caution. I still go out sometimes during the day to clear my head, to follow a trail, but I no longer romanticize the dark. The woods are honest. They don't pretend to be safe. It's us who forget. And when you forget, normal bends, and someone waiting in a doorway or leaning on a tree can turn a holiday into a memory you can't shake. If any of these stories stuck with you, tell me in the comments if you've ever felt that sudden shift, when ordinary plans suddenly shouldn't have been trusted. If you liked hearing these, subscribe for more true accounts. Hit like so more people can find them, and share your own story if you feel safe doing so. Thanks for listening. Stay careful out there.